Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. All right, really quickly, I do want to transition to our boys in the Big Ten. By the way, I would say these Tuesday shows have been running a little shorter than the traditional Monday-Friday show, Monday-Thursday show, and I think this is one. This will be a pretty quick show, quick in-and-out show, but hopefully does get you through the middle of the week. Again, I hope everybody is having a great week. And the one thing that's really cool about this week, I'll tell you this, is that we get Big Ten football back. I should mention we also get Mountain West football back. We're actually going to have some late-night kickoffs this coming weekend, 10:30 Eastern. You're at the bar. Guess what? You get a little San Jose State in your life and San Diego State in your life this weekend thanks to the Mountain West. But the big story is that the Big Ten returns this week. And it's crazy because it felt like I spent all August, and I did, yelling and screaming about how bad the decision was. I spent all September, early September, yelling and screaming about how bad the decision was. We hear the Big Ten say they're going to cancel. We hear them say that they will never reconsider coming back. And yet here we are. They announced they're coming back. They announced October 23rd. And even then, it felt like this lifetime away. Like, how are we going to get to October 23rd? Only here we are. And the Big Ten is officially back. First game, circle the calendars, wake up the kids. Illinois, Wisconsin, Friday night. Not going to lie, I don't think a lot of people will be rescheduling their Friday nights for Illinois, Wisconsin, but it is cool to have the Big Ten back. And so what I want to do over the next few minutes on this show is really just get you kind of caught up with what happened in the Big Ten last year. I know that we don't have a lot of diehard Wisconsin fans or Iowa fans or Minnesota fans who listen to this show, but I do just kind of feel like it's been a really long time since we saw these teams play. I mean, Minnesota, Michigan, Penn State played on New Year's Day, but Ohio State hasn't played in 2020. It's already the end of October. It's October 20th. So what I want to do is I want to go through most of the teams. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. Just to remind you what happened last year and what you need to know for this year. And so obviously, without a doubt, we need to start with the Ohio State Buckeyes. And last year was incredible. Remember, it was Ryan Day's first year taking over for Urban Meyer. We were all questioning, how's this going to work out? What's it going to look like? Is this guy ready to be a head coach? Well, he certainly was, as Ohio State went 13-0 in the regular season, in large part because they had a quarterback named Justin Fields who transferred from Georgia. Justin Fields was awesome. He was fantastic. He was the X factor for a really good team that made them great, finishing with 41 total touchdowns last season in an unbelievable season. Ohio State essentially was not challenged the entire regular season. It was incredible how dominant they were. You could argue one of the most dominant Big Ten teams ever. Went back and looked it up. They did not have a single game in which they lost by fewer than 9 points through the college football playoff. They beat Penn State, they didn't win. Let me start over. They didn't win any game by less than 9 points throughout the regular season. They beat Penn State by 9 at home, crushed Wisconsin when Wisconsin was playing well, crushed Michigan, obviously, when Michigan was playing really well. And the big story with Ohio State was they got to the college football playoff, and they had a game against Clemson under control. For everybody who doesn't remember the details, they get up 10-0 early. They unfortunately really had to settle for a bunch of field goals that could have been touchdowns. Clemson slowly comes back. They have a few controversial calls late in the second half that go against them. Shaun Wade, star cornerback, gets ejected for targeting. There was a controversial strip and score. Essentially, Ohio State stripped the ball from a Clemson receiver. It was eventually ruled not a catch. That would have been a touchdown. That would have given Ohio State the lead. Instead, it didn't happen, and Clemson ends up winning. I bring all this up to say this is why Ohio State was fighting for a college football season this year, because they knew that they had a team good enough to win the national championship this year with Justin Fields, with all their stars at the skill positions, with Sean Wade on defense. And so they're going to be a fascinating team. They are the overwhelming favorite. And as I said on Monday's show, they should not only make the college football playoff, but they might be realistically the only team that can challenge Alabama or Clemson at the top of the sport. It certainly looks that way after Notre Dame struggled this weekend, after Georgia lost this weekend. And so it's good to have Ohio State back, not a moment too soon, because we need somebody to challenge Clemson and Ohio State, or Clemson and Alabama, for the national championship. Moving on to Michigan. Jim Harbaugh did some Jim Harbaugh stuff. Now, I will say in his defense, he went out, hired kind of a new age offensive coordinator. If you remember last year, they got a kid named Josh Gaddis from Alabama. He was Alabama's quarterbacks coach, I believe, comes to Michigan, becomes the play caller, and they're going to revolutionize their offense. Didn't work out well early. Michigan struggles on offense, barely beats Army, barely beats Iowa, gets crushed by Wisconsin, and you just feel like, oh my God, this team is terrible. To their credit, they did lose to Penn State, but kind of turned the corner late in that game. They lost by a touchdown at Penn State. What ends up happening in that game is they start to figure out the offense. The next week, they go to Notre Dame and smack Notre Dame around, beat Notre Dame, and they get rolling. They win 4 going into the Ohio State game. And unfortunately, they did what Jim Harbaugh does way too often in big games. They lost to Ohio State. Then they go to the bowl game. They play Alabama, who, of course, was not part of the playoff last year. Lose to Alabama. Season ends, and it'll be interesting because their starting quarterback, Shea Patterson, is gone. Joe Milton is the new starter there. They lost a bunch of talent off the offensive line, including a couple first-round draft picks. A couple wide receivers are gone. So it's year 2 of this offense, but will it be any better? And will Harbaugh do anything to get people off of his back? Because I just feel like, look, this is who Michigan is right now. They are not on the level of Ohio State. I see no reason to believe that they will get there. And the question becomes, are Michigan fans going to be okay with this? Is he going to go back to the NFL? Because the gap between him and Ohio State, between Michigan and Ohio State, is widening, not shrinking. Third team everybody always going to talk about in the Big Ten is Penn State. And I got to ask you, does anyone win more and get less acclaim than James Franklin? Here are Penn State's last 4 seasons under James Franklin. They went 11-3 in 2016. They went 11-2 in 2017. They go 9-4 in 2018 and 11-2 last season, capped by beating Memphis in the Cotton Bowl. And, of course, as I referenced a minute ago, they beat Michigan in the regular season, and they were the team that played Ohio State the toughest straight into the playoff when Ohio State lost to Clemson. I do understand. Penn State has never made the playoff. They won the Big Ten in 2016, but Ohio State got into the playoff over them. And so I get it. Penn State has never been on that big stage, so James Franklin doesn't get the credit that he deserves. I just feel like this program is rolling and nobody talks about it. They will be good again. I do question if they will be somewhat limited on offense. Their quarterback, Sean Clifford, is good, but hardly great. He's definitely not Justin Fields. And they did lose their best defensive player, a kid by the name of Micah Parsons, who opted out of the season and was one of the few guys who did not opt back in. Speaking of opt-outs and opt-ins, how about your boy P.J. Fleck at Minnesota? Okay, this is the great story that you probably forgot happened last year. Minnesota won 11 games, including, by the way, they did beat Penn State. They have a quarterback named Tanner Morgan, originally from Kentucky. Really good story how he ended up at Minnesota. Probably the second best quarterback in the Big Ten last year behind Justin Fields. They have a kid named Rashad Bateman, a future star in the NFL. He opts out of the season this past few weeks. Then he decides to opt back in once we find out that there is going to be a college football season. And I'll just tell you, there's real excitement in Minnesota. You talk about a team that won 11 games. It was just how about this for a stat? Throw this around at your next cocktail party. Minnesota last year won 10 games. It was the second time since 1905. 1905. You can look it up. I know you don't believe me. Look it up. 1905, the last time Minnesota won 10 games. Well, I take that back. They have won 10 games twice since 1905, once in the early 2000s, once last year, and they should be really good again this weekend. We will talk about Minnesota, Michigan this coming episode because they play this opening weekend, and that should be a really fun game. Staying in the Big Ten West, Wisconsin, kind of a crazy season. They start off 6-0. They have 4 shutouts in their first 6 games, and we're talking about them as one, maybe the best defense in college football. Then they have this weird loss to Illinois. They lose to Ohio State, and they kind of go back to being Wisconsin. To their credit, they did beat Michigan convincingly. They did beat Minnesota. They did win the Big Ten West and go to the Big Ten championship game. They lost to Ohio State, and they lost to Oregon in the Rose Bowl. Kind of wrapping up on the rest of the Big Ten. First of all, Nebraska, okay? I'm just going to say it. I feel like I'm the only guy on the planet that will be critical of Scott Frost. Now, I don't think he inherited the best situation at Nebraska. I don't think that the talent is what everyone thought it was, but he went 5-7 last year, and he lost to some teams that Nebraska should never lose to, okay? They started out 4-1. They go to Ohio State. They get smoked by Ohio State on the last weekend of September. And here's the rest of their schedule, essentially, okay? So after October 1st, Nebraska won a grand total of 2 games against Maryland and against Northwestern, not exactly a murderer's row of college football programs there. They get smoked by Minnesota. They lose to Indiana. They lose to Purdue. They lose to Wisconsin, and they lose to Iowa. I understand that Iowa and Wisconsin are both pretty decent teams, but I'm sorry. If you're Nebraska, you got to beat Purdue. You got to beat Indiana. You got to go 7-5 and go to a bowl game. And so it'll be interesting to see if they're any better this year. I'm not sold that they are as they get set to open with Ohio State this coming weekend. And then I believe they have Wisconsin in week 2. So not exactly an easy start for Nebraska. But I will say this, as critical as I have been of Scott Frost over the last couple of years, I do want to give him credit. I do believe out of everyone in the Big Ten, he and Jim Harbaugh were by far the most vocal people about playing a season. And so I do give Scott Frost credit because I will say, when you know that your team is not going to be very good, when you know that your team has a lot of work to do, it would have been easy to kind of hide in the shadows and say, I'm just going to sit this one out. I'll let Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh fight for this thing. Scott Frost, maybe more than anybody, was out in front saying, we want to play this season. I love the competitive edge from Scott Frost. I love the competitive excitement, and I'm excited. I really do hope Nebraska is better. I'm not sold that they will be this year because they still have the kid Adrian Martinez at quarterback. Do not trust him at all. I think they struggle with Ohio State this weekend, but hopefully they get back to a little bit of respectability because college football is fun when Nebraska's good. Nebraska has some of the best fans in college football. They always sell out that stadium when they're allowed in, and I hope they're good. And that's really it. A couple more notes from the Big Ten before we get to where Aaron was right, where Aaron was wrong. I'll just say a couple quick things. One, actually what I'll just do is I'll just go through a couple important things that you need to know. One, Rutgers, you probably forgot. You probably don't even remember who their last coach was. It was a guy named Chris Ash. He stunk. They hired Greg Schiano in the offseason. The Schiano man is back. And I will say, look, I've been very critical. I did not believe that he should be the head coach at Tennessee. We'll get into Jeremy Pruitt in a minute. But I did not believe he should be the head coach at Tennessee. But I do think he can be pretty good at Rutgers, okay? For people who do not know, I went to UConn, and Greg Schiano's his successful years at Rutgers kind of happened when I was at UConn. And so I saw that program up close and in person firsthand when I was in school, obviously going to games, covering the teams, whatever. And what I would say is I don't think Greg Schiano is ever going to win like a National Coach of the Year award, but I do think he has really good connections in the New Jersey high schools, and I do think he's going to be about as good as Rutgers gets in this current iteration of the program in the Big Ten. I think he can get them in a normal year to 6-6 and to bowl eligibility. So as critical as I was of Greg Schiano, I do think he's the right fit there. Also in the Big Ten East, Michigan State, a new coach. If you remember, Mark D'Antonio waited until his contract rolled over, so he got paid. Then he quit. They went and got Mel Tucker, the head coach at Colorado. It remains to be seen if they will be even decent. They were really bad last year. Finally, in the Big Ten East, Maryland, The only thing you need to know about Maryland, Tua's brother transferred from Alabama to Maryland and is expected to be their starting quarterback. In the Big Ten West, I hit on most of the big teams. I would add Lovie Smith still at Illinois. Shout out to Lovie Smith, who got Illinois Bowl eligible last year. Iowa, I'm just going to throw it out there. Iowa was apparently really good last year, and I just don't remember it. Like, I looked them up. They went 10-3, and their 3 losses were by 5 points to Penn State, 2 points to Wisconsin, and by a touchdown to Michigan. And I don't remember any of it, but apparently they went 10-3. Apparently they were really good. I do remember them beating USC in a bowl game. I just had no idea that Iowa was that good. So Iowa is good. And finally, Purdue obviously won. We did hear that Jeff Brom, their coach, has tested positive for COVID and is actually showing a lot of symptoms, so we hope he's okay. But it'll be interesting with them. They got the skill players. Rondale Moore has opted back into the season. David Bell was phenomenal as their wide receiver last year when Rondale Moore got hurt. And now it's just going to be really interesting to see how they handle things going into, I guess it would be year 4 of the Jeff Brom era. Really successful the first year, really struggled last year with injuries. We'll see what can happen if they get healthy. Most importantly is the health of Jeff Brom, who, as I said, has tested positive for COVID, and we hope he's